There are some betrayals that arrive loudly, arguments, accusations, doors slammed shut. And then there are the ones that arrive quietly, wrapped in familiarity, smiling at you while they take something you didn't realize you had handed over. This was the second kind. She wasn't just a friend. She was my person. The one who knew my routines, my fears, the stories I didn't repeat often because they felt too fragile to say out loud. We met during a time when I was still learning how to trust people again, and somehow, she slipped past all my caution without effort. At first, it felt natural.
Easy.
We talked every day, not because we had something important to say, but because silence felt wrong when it stretched too long between us. We shared coffee, long walks, late-night conversations that wandered from meaningless jokes to deeply personal confessions without warning. I told her things I hadn't told anyone else. Not because she asked, but because she listened in a way that made me feel safe. She remembered details. She noticed when my voice changed. She knew when to push and when to let things rest. That kind of attentiveness builds trust quietly, brick by brick. I didn't notice when the balance shifted. At some point, I began to rely on her presence more than I should have. When something happened in my life, she was the first person I wanted to tell. When I felt unsure, I looked for her reaction before trusting my own. It didn't feel like dependence at the time. It felt like closeness. Looking back, that was the first mistake. The second mistake was believing that loyalty grows at the same pace for everyone. There were small signs I ignored, moments that felt slightly off but not alarming enough to confront. A comment repeated almost word for word to someone else. A reaction that didn't match the story I had shared privately. A pause where warmth used to be. I told myself I was overthinking. I had promised myself I wouldn't become suspicious without reason. I wanted to believe that trust, once earned, deserved generosity. Then one afternoon, I learned how fragile that belief was. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation. No shouting. I found out accidentally. The way truth often reveals itself when it's tired of hiding. A mutual friend mentioned something casually, something they couldn't have known unless it had come from one place. From her. My stomach dropped, not in anger, but in disbelief. I remember asking carefully, trying to sound calm. "How do you know that?" They answered without hesitation, without awareness of the weight of their words. She told me. I smiled politely. Finished the conversation. Went home. And sat in silence. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had, searching for context I might have missed. Trying to understand whether I had misunderstood her role in my life, or whether she had misunderstood mine. The betrayal wasn't that she shared a secret. It was which secret she chose to share. The one I had told her on a night when my voice shook. The one I had trusted her to hold, not pass along. The one that wasn't hers to reshape into conversation. That night, I didn't confront her. I needed to understand something first, not about her, but about myself. About why I felt so deeply wounded. About how easily I had opened a door I once guarded carefully. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it comes from carelessness. From people who enjoy closeness, but don't respect its weight. Still, the damage is the same. The next time I saw her, she acted normal.
Warm.
Curious. Concerned. She asked how I was, how my week had been, whether something felt off. I looked at her and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I understood then that the version of her I trusted existed only in the space I created. And once that space was violated, it could never feel the same again. I didn't accuse her. I didn't demand an explanation. I started observing. And what I noticed over time changed how I would choose friends forever. Once you see someone clearly, you can't unsee it. That's what surprised me the most. I hadn't expected the betrayal to feel so quiet afterward. No constant anger. No dramatic grief. Just a steady awareness that something essential had shifted and that it would never return to what it was. I began paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Not obsessively, calmly. I watched how she spoke about other people when they weren't around. How easily private stories became anecdotes. How sympathy turned into storytelling when it earned her attention. None of it was cruel. That made it harder. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She simply didn't understand the difference between being trusted and being entertained by trust. To her, information was connection. Sharing made her feel important, relevant, included, and I had given her too much. The realization stung, but it also clarified something about myself. I had mistaken emotional availability for emotional safety. I had assumed that because someone listened well, they also knew how to protect what they heard. That assumption was costly. I tested the truth quietly. I stopped sharing personal details. I spoke in generalities. I kept my voice light. And almost immediately, I noticed the shift in her interest. Our conversations grew shorter, less focused. She asked fewer questions. The closeness faded without confrontation. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because it confirmed what I already knew. Our bond had been built more on access than loyalty, on information rather than understanding. One afternoon, she finally asked, "You've been distant. Did I do something?" The question wasn't defensive. It sounded genuinely confused. And for a moment, I considered telling her everything, laying it out honestly, giving her the chance to explain herself, to apologize, to understand the impact of what she had done. But then I asked myself something important. Would explaining this protect me, or teach her how to do it better next time? That question stopped me. I realized then that not every betrayal deserves a confrontation. Some deserve a boundary. Some deserve distance. Some deserve silence. I chose silence. I smiled and said, "I've just been focusing on myself lately." She nodded, accepting the answer easily. Too easily. That was the final confirmation. In the weeks that followed, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the version of friendship I had believed in. Relief that I hadn't confronted her in anger or desperation. Relief that I had trusted my instincts instead of arguing with them. I learned something crucial during that time. People reveal their values not in how they treat you, but in how they treat the responsibility of knowing you. Trust isn't about affection. It's about restraint. And once restraint is gone, affection can't replace it. The betrayal didn't make me bitter. It made me selective. I stopped offering my inner world freely. I let people earn it slowly, not through time spent together, but through consistency, discretion, and respect. Some friendships didn't survive that shift. Others deepened. I began to understand that losing a friend doesn't always mean losing support. Sometimes it means making room for healthier connections, ones that don't require vigilance to feel safe. And though I never confronted her directly, I carried the lesson she gave me forward. Quietly. Permanently. I learned how to listen without oversharing, how to connect without surrendering, how to be open without being exposed. That experience reshaped the way I trusted, not by closing my heart, but by protecting it with wisdom instead of hope alone. And the most surprising part? I never missed her the way I thought I would. What I missed was the illusion, the comfort of believing that closeness automatically meant loyalty. Once that illusion was gone, I didn't feel emptier. I felt clearer. And clarity, I learned, is the beginning of real peace. Clarity has a way of changing how you move through the world. After that realization settled in, I noticed how differently I showed up in conversations. Not guarded, not closed, but aware. I wasn't trying to protect myself from everyone. I was protecting myself from repeating the same mistake. I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. How some people lean in when you're vulnerable, not to support you, but to collect you. How intimacy can feel like care, while quietly turning into currency. I didn't blame them anymore. I simply stopped participating. There were moments when I questioned myself. Was I being unfair? Too cautious? Was I punishing her for something that might have been a misunderstanding? Those thoughts crept in during quiet evenings, when memory softens edges and nostalgia tries to rewrite reality. But every time doubt surfaced, something steadier answered it. I remembered how easily she had accepted my distance, how little curiosity she showed once the story stopped, how quickly the friendship adjusted to a shallower version of me. Real friends ask why. They don't just adapt. I didn't cut her off dramatically. I didn't announce boundaries or issue ultimatums. I let the friendship settle where it naturally belonged once truth removed the illusion. Over time, we became polite, familiar, distant, and that distance felt right. What surprised me was how much space opened up inside me once I stopped carrying that relationship. I hadn't realized how much energy it took to maintain closeness that wasn't reciprocal. How often I had edited myself, softened reactions, overlooked discomfort to preserve harmony. Without that weight, I felt lighter. I became more intentional with new people. I listened longer before sharing. I noticed how someone spoke about others when they trusted me with their opinions. I paid attention to whether they protected stories that weren't theirs to tell. Trust stopped being something I gave. It became something I recognized. I also learned to forgive myself. Not in a rushed way, not with platitudes, but honestly. I acknowledged that I had wanted closeness, that I had valued connection, that I had believed in the goodness of someone else because I wanted to believe it was real. That didn't make me foolish. It made me human. The betrayal didn't harden me. It refined me. I didn't stop opening up, I just learned how to pace it. I learned that depth doesn't require speed, and intimacy doesn't require exposure. There were moments later when I saw her again, in group settings, conversations brushing past each other politely. She seemed unchanged, comfortable, unaware of the lesson she had taught me. And that was okay. Not everyone needs to know the impact they've had on you. Some people shape your life without ever understanding how or why. Their role isn't to grow with you, it's to teach you something you'll carry forward alone. I carried this one carefully. It showed up the next time someone leaned in too fast, asked too many personal questions too soon, mirrored concern without consistency. I didn't pull away abruptly. I slowed down. I let time reveal what intention couldn't hide. And time always tells the truth. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always destroy your ability to trust. Sometimes it sharpens it. It teaches you the difference between someone who wants access and someone who wants connection. That difference matters. And once you learn to see it, you can't unsee it, not in friendships, not in love, not in the quiet choices you make about who gets to know the parts of you that matter most. I didn't lose a friend that day. I gained discernment. And that changed everything that came after. Discernment changes your silence. Before, silence used to feel awkward to me, like something needed to be filled, explained, softened. After that experience, silence became information. I learned to listen to what wasn't said, to how people behaved when there was nothing to gain. I noticed how often people confused proximity with intimacy. Sitting close, talking often, sharing routines, none of it guarantees care. Care shows up differently. It shows up in discretion, in how someone guards what you trust them with even when you're not around to notice. That awareness followed me everywhere. When new friendships formed, I didn't rush to replicate the closeness I had lost. I let connections breathe. I allowed gaps. I watched how people handled those gaps, whether they respected them or tried to fill them with pressure. Some people faded quickly when they realized I wasn't offering instant access anymore. Others stayed, steady and unbothered by the pace. Those were the ones worth keeping. I thought about her less as time passed, but every now and then, a memory would surface unexpectedly. A laugh we shared, a long conversation, a moment when I had felt completely understood. When that happened, I didn't push the memory away. I let it sit and then I let it go. Because understanding isn't the same as loyalty. That distinction took me a long time to learn. I also noticed something else. The betrayal hadn't just changed how I trusted others, it changed how I trusted myself. I became more attuned to my own discomfort. I stopped overriding it in the name of kindness or connection. When something felt off, I didn't demand proof anymore. I respected the feeling. That didn't make me suspicious. It made me aligned. There was a moment, months later, when someone new tried to step into the role she once held, asking questions that felt too personal too quickly, offering sympathy before understanding context. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. And this time I listened to it. I redirected the conversation. I set a boundary gently. And I watched how they responded. They adjusted. They didn't push. They didn't probe. That response told me everything. I realized then that healthy people don't need access to feel close. They're comfortable earning trust instead of extracting it. They don't rush intimacy because they're not afraid of time. That realization felt grounding. I stopped feeling embarrassed about being careful. I stopped apologizing for pacing myself. I stopped worrying that discernment would make me lonely. It didn't. It made my circle smaller, but stronger. The friendships that remained felt lighter, safer. I didn't second-guess what I shared or wonder where my words would travel once they left my mouth. I could speak freely without bracing myself afterward. That freedom mattered more than popularity ever had. And slowly, without effort, I became someone others trusted. Not because I shared everything, but because I respected what was shared with me. I knew the weight of knowing someone's truth. I carried it carefully. Sometimes I wondered if she ever realized what she had done. If she noticed the distance, the shift, the way I stopped inviting her into my inner world. But that curiosity faded quickly. Closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from growth. I didn't need an apology to move on. I needed understanding, and I had found it. The friend I trusted betrayed me, yes. But in doing so, she gave me a lens I would never lose. A way of seeing people clearly without bitterness, without blame. Just clarity. And that clarity continued to guide me, quietly and steadily, into every connection that followed. With time, that clarity stopped feeling sharp and started feeling natural. It wasn't something I had to remind myself of anymore. It lived in how I responded, in what I allowed, in what I no longer felt the need to question. I became comfortable not being everyone's favorite person. That was another change I hadn't expected. Before, I cared deeply about being liked, about being seen as warm and understanding. Now, I cared more about being honest, especially with myself. If someone misunderstood me because I didn't offer immediate access, I let them. I didn't chase correction. That felt like freedom. I noticed how often people reveal their intentions through impatience. How discomfort shows up when they don't get what they expect right away. I watched those moments closely, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Patience, I learned, is one of the clearest indicators of respect. There were still times when I missed the ease of that old friendship, not the person, but the feeling of being known without effort. But I reminded myself that ease built on exposure alone isn't the same as safety. Safety has weight. It asks for responsibility. I had felt what it was like when that responsibility was ignored. I also became more aware of my own role in the dynamic. I had offered pieces of myself too quickly, not because she demanded them, but because I wanted connection to feel immediate. That awareness wasn't self-blame. It was self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is powerful. Once you know why you do something, you can choose whether to continue. That choice showed up in small, quiet ways. I shared less at first. I listened more. I let people reveal who they were over time instead of filling in the blanks for them. I noticed who respected my pace and who tried to bypass it. The ones who stayed earned my trust slowly and fully. There was a moment much later when someone asked me why I seemed so calm about friendships ending. I thought about it before answering. Because not every ending is a loss, I said. Some are corrections. That felt true. I didn't harden. I didn't retreat. I refined. I learned how to let people be who they are without needing them to be who I hoped they'd be. That acceptance made disappointment less personal and clarity more accessible. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I began to feel deeply at ease with myself. I didn't need to narrate my life to feel real. I didn't need constant reflection from others to understand my worth. I had become my own witness. That quiet confidence changed the energy I brought into every room. People noticed. Some leaned in more thoughtfully. Others drifted away. Both outcomes felt right. The betrayal that once felt so personal no longer felt central. It became a reference point, not a wound, but a lesson that informed my choices without defining them. I learned that trust isn't about believing people will never hurt you. It's about choosing people who would care if they did. And, even more importantly, it's about trusting yourself to respond with integrity when they don't. That understanding stayed with me. It showed up every time I chose discretion over drama, distance over confrontation, growth over explanation. It shaped my relationships quietly, consistently, without needing validation. And as I continued forward, building connections rooted in mutual respect rather than emotional urgency, I felt something settle into place. I wasn't guarded. I was grounded. And that grounding changed the way everything felt, lighter, clearer, and finally aligned with who I had become. Grounded people move differently, not slower, not faster, just with intention. I began to notice that in myself, especially in moments where I once would have rushed to explain or justify. Now, I let things be misunderstood if they needed to be. I trusted that clarity reveals itself over time, without force. There were days when I ran into her unexpectedly. A shared space. A mutual gathering. Our conversations were polite, careful, surface level. She still smiled the same way, still spoke with warmth. But I felt no pull toward reopening what had closed. There was no anger left to process, no desire to revisit old ground. That surprised me. I had always thought healing meant revisiting pain until it lost its power. But I learned that sometimes healing means knowing when something no longer needs your attention. When a chapter has already taught you what it came to teach. I started noticing how many friendships survive not because they're healthy, but because people are afraid of being alone. I had lived that fear once. I understood how it keeps you tethered to dynamics that quietly drain you. Now, I didn't negotiate with that fear anymore. I listened to it, acknowledged it, and then chose differently. Solitude no longer scared me. In fact, it sharpened my discernment even more. Time alone gave me space to check in with myself, to notice how my body responded to certain people, certain conversations. I paid attention to energy, whether it expanded me or contracted me. That awareness became my guide. I also learned to forgive without reconnecting. That was a lesson I hadn't known was possible. Forgiveness didn't require access. It didn't require explanation or apology. It required understanding of myself, of her limitations, of the dynamic we had co-created. Once I understood those things, resentment lost its grip. I wished her well quietly, without reopening the door. That quiet closure felt complete. As new friendships formed, I noticed how differently they unfolded. There was no urgency to be everything to each other. We let the relationship build naturally, layer by layer. Trust grew from consistency, not confession. From presence, not proximity. Those connections felt steady, reliable, safe. I became someone who could hold space for others without absorbing their chaos. I listened deeply, but I didn't carry what wasn't mine to carry. That boundary kept my compassion intact without costing me my peace. Sometimes, people mistook my calm for distance. They asked if I was guarded, if I kept walls up. I smiled when that happened. I don't build walls, I would think. I build doors, and I choose when to open them. That distinction mattered. The betrayal had taught me something subtle but essential. Not everyone who feels close to you is meant to know everything about you. Intimacy requires more than time and access. It requires respect for the weight of what's shared. Once you learn that, you stop giving your inner world to people who don't know how to carry it. I didn't lose my openness. I refined it. And in doing so, I found myself surrounded by fewer voices, but clearer ones. People who spoke with care, who listened with presence, who understood that trust isn't something you take, it's something you earn and protect. That environment allowed me to relax into myself fully. The friend I trusted had betrayed me, yes. But in that betrayal, I gained discernment, self-respect, and a deeper understanding of connection. I learned how to choose relationships that didn't require me to second-guess my own instincts. And as I continued forward, grounded and clear, I felt a quiet confidence guiding me, not away from people, but toward the right ones. I kept walking, open but anchored, knowing that clarity doesn't isolate you. It aligns you. Alignment brings a kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It settles in slowly, until one day you realize you're no longer bracing yourself in conversations. You're no longer scanning faces for reactions, or replaying words afterward to see if you shared too much. You simply speak, and then you move on. That was new for me. I noticed it most when I started forming deeper connections again. Not immediately close ones, but steady ones. People I could sit with in silence without feeling the need to perform. People who didn't press for stories, but stayed present long enough that sharing felt natural instead of extracted. With them, trust unfolded organically. I didn't feel the urge to rush intimacy anymore. I let people reveal themselves over time, not through what they said about themselves, but through how they handled other people's vulnerability. How they spoke when no one was watching. How they respected boundaries without needing them explained twice. That awareness protected me more than any rule ever could have. There were moments when the memory of that betrayal surfaced unexpectedly. Not sharply, not painfully, just as a reminder of how far I'd come. I would catch myself smiling at the difference. At how easily I could now step back instead of leaning in. At how natural it felt to trust my instincts without needing confirmation. I realized then that healing doesn't always feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like neutrality, like the absence of tension where it used to live. I also learned how to sit with disappointment without letting it harden me. When someone didn't show up the way I hoped, I didn't internalize it as rejection. I saw it as information. I adjusted my expectations quietly and moved forward without resentment. That skill saved me countless emotional negotiations. People came into my life who respected that energy. They didn't compete for closeness. They didn't demand loyalty prematurely. They let the relationship be what it was, and that freedom made it stronger. One day, someone asked me what I valued most in a friend. I didn't hesitate. Discretion, I said. And consistency. Those words surprised even me. They weren't dramatic qualities. They didn't sound exciting. But they were foundational. They were the difference between feeling seen and feeling safe. I understood now that trust isn't proven in moments of closeness. It's proven in moments of distance. In what someone does with your story when you're not there to hear it. That understanding stayed with me. I no longer feared betrayal the way I once did. Not because I believed it wouldn't happen again, but because I trusted myself to recognize it early and to respond with self-respect instead of denial. That confidence made me more open, not less. I stopped mistaking vigilance for strength. Strength, I learned, is knowing when to walk away without needing to justify the decision. It's choosing peace over explanation. It's letting go without needing the other person to understand why. As I continued forward, building a life shaped by discernment rather than urgency, I felt deeply aligned with myself. Not closed. Not distant. Just clear. The friend I trusted betrayed me, but the person I became afterward learned how to trust herself. And that, in the end, was the most valuable relationship I would ever build. Trusting myself changed the way I experienced connection at its core. It wasn't something I announced or explained to anyone. It showed up quietly in how I entered rooms, in how I left conversations without carrying them home with me. I stopped asking, do they like me? I started asking, do I feel at ease here? That question became my compass. I noticed how often I had once mistaken intensity for depth. How urgency can masquerade as intimacy. The betrayal stripped those illusions away gently, almost kindly, leaving behind something simpler and more reliable. Ease. When I felt ease with someone, I stayed. When I didn't force it. I didn't search for reasons. I trusted the feeling and moved on. That trust made my life quieter, but also fuller. There were still moments when old habits tried to resurface. A desire to explain myself too much. A temptation to smooth things over when something felt misaligned. But I caught myself now. I paused. I asked whether my silence would cost me more than my honesty, or whether my honesty would simply be wasted on someone who wasn't listening. That discernment saved me. I also noticed how differently I handled vulnerability. I didn't stop being open. I became precise. I shared with intention, not impulse. I chose people who could hold my truth without reshaping it into something else. That precision didn't make me colder. It made me clearer. Sometimes people asked why I seemed so composed. Why I didn't get pulled into drama. Why I didn't react the way others did. I smiled at those questions because the answer was simple, even if it wasn't obvious. I had learned what it costs to give too much to the wrong person. I had learned how to recognize respect, not in grand gestures, but in restraint. In what people don't say. In what they don't repeat. In how they protect stories that aren't theirs to tell. Those lessons stayed with me, shaping every new connection quietly and consistently. I didn't become immune to disappointment. I became resilient to it. When someone fell short, I didn't collapse inward. I recalibrated. I adjusted. I chose my next step without bitterness. That resilience felt like freedom. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always take something from you. Sometimes it gives you the clarity to stop abandoning yourself. It teaches you to choose alignment over attachment, peace over proximity. And once you choose that consistently, your life begins to reflect it. The friendships that formed afterward were fewer, but deeper, calmer, built on mutual respect rather than emotional exchange. I felt seen without being exposed, known without being consumed. That balance was everything. I didn't rush to label connections anymore. I let them exist as they were. If they deepened, I welcomed it. If they stayed light, I appreciated that too. I didn't demand more than what was being offered. And in doing so, I discovered something unexpected. Contentment. Not excitement that fades quickly. Not comfort that dulls you over time. But a steady sense of alignment that doesn't require constant reassurance. The friend I trusted betrayed me, and that truth will always be part of my story. But it no longer defines me. What defines me now is the quiet confidence that came after. The ability to move through relationships with awareness instead of fear. The trust one built with myself when I chose clarity over denial. And with that trust firmly in place, I continued forward, open, grounded, and fully present, letting life unfold without forcing it, knowing that the right connections would meet me at the pace I had finally learned to honor. As that contentment settled in, I began to notice something subtle but powerful. I no longer felt the urge to be understood by everyone. That need had once driven so many of my choices. I wanted people to see my intentions, to know my heart, to recognize my loyalty. Now, I understood that being understood isn't always necessary to live honestly. That realization lifted a quiet weight I hadn't known I was carrying. I watched how easily people misinterpret others, often through the lens of their own needs and fears. I stopped trying to correct those misinterpretations unless they truly mattered. Silence became a form of self-respect, not avoidance. I also became more comfortable with emotional pacing. When something felt meaningful, I didn't rush to name it. I let it exist first. I allowed moments to mature, instead of capturing them too quickly with labels or expectations. That patience gave relationships room to breathe and gave me space to observe. There were times when someone leaned in, curious, wanting more access than I was ready to give. Before, I might have felt guilty for pulling back. Now, I simply adjusted the distance without explanation. The right people didn't question it. They stayed present, not demanding. That told me everything I needed to know. I noticed how often people equate closeness with entitlement. How familiarity can quietly turn into expectation. The betrayal had taught me to notice that shift early, not with suspicion, but with awareness. I didn't wait for discomfort to become damage anymore. I also learned to separate forgiveness from proximity. I could wish someone well without inviting them back into my inner world. That distinction felt mature, grounded, and freeing. It allowed me to release resentment without reopening old wounds. Occasionally, I thought about the version of myself who once believed loyalty meant unlimited access. I felt tenderness toward her now, not embarrassment. She had loved deeply because she didn't yet know how to love wisely. That wasn't a flaw, it was a stage. Wisdom didn't replace her softness. It protected it. As life continued, new experiences tested that wisdom in quiet ways. Small disappointments, minor betrayals, moments where I had to decide whether to speak, step back, or simply observe. Each time, I felt more confident in my response, not because it was perfect, but because it was aligned. I realized then that alignment doesn't make life predictable. It makes it honest. You still encounter complexity, still feel emotion, still risk connection. But you do it without losing yourself in the process. The betrayal had been painful, yes. But it had also stripped away illusions I didn't know were fragile. It had taught me to choose discernment over hope alone and self-trust over external validation. And as I moved forward, carrying those lessons quietly with me, I didn't feel closed off from people. I felt open in a new way, not wide open, not exposed, but open with intention. That kind of openness doesn't invite everyone in. It invites the right ones. Inviting the right ones in changed everything about how my life felt. Not louder, not fuller in the way people usually describe, just steadier, more honest, less exhausting. I noticed that the people who stayed didn't need constant reassurance. They didn't need to be reminded of their place in my life. There was an ease to our connection, a mutual understanding that trust wasn't something to prove daily, but something to maintain quietly. That ease was new to me. Before, friendships had felt like something I needed to manage. Check in often. Explain absences. Repair small misunderstandings before they grew into imagined conflicts. Now, I let relationships breathe. If someone drifted for a while, I didn't panic. If plans fell through, I didn't personalize it. And in return, I felt respected. I began to recognize how much emotional labor I had been doing before, carrying other people's insecurities, smoothing over discomfort, protecting feelings that weren't mine to protect. The betrayal made me stop doing that unconsciously. I chose responsibility over rescue. That choice gave me energy back. I spent it on myself, on learning, on rest, on moments that didn't need to be shared to feel meaningful. I stopped narrating my inner world for validation. I lived it. There were still times when I felt sadness for what was lost, not the friend herself, but the version of me that believed closeness was always safe. That innocence doesn't come back once it's gone. But I didn't mourn it as a loss anymore. I respected it as a beginning. It had taught me what I needed to know next. I also noticed how the betrayal sharpened my integrity. I became fiercely careful with other people's stories. If someone trusted me with something private, I held it with the seriousness it deserved, even when repeating it would have earned connection or sympathy elsewhere. Especially then. I knew how it felt to have your truth turned into conversation. I refused to be that person to anyone else. That choice became part of my identity. People began trusting me more, not because I was open, but because I was discreet. They felt safe around me without fully understanding why. And I realized that safety is felt, not explained. Every now and then, I wondered what would have happened if I had confronted her. If I had asked for an explanation, an apology, some kind of closure shaped by words. But that curiosity didn't last long. Closure had already arrived, in the form of growth. I didn't need her to admit anything for the lesson to settle. I didn't need acknowledgement to move forward. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood. As time went on, I found myself less reactive in all areas of life. I paused before responding. I listened more than I spoke. I trusted silence to do its work. Those habits didn't make me passive, they made me intentional. I wasn't afraid of betrayal anymore. Not because I believed it wouldn't happen again, but because I trusted myself to recognize it early, respond with dignity, and walk away without abandoning who I am. That trust changed how I loved, how I chose friends, how I stood in the world. The friend I trusted betrayed me, but the person I became afterward learned how to trust herself, fully, quietly, without hesitation. And that trust became the foundation for everything that followed. What came after that foundation was something I hadn't expected at all: lightness. Not happiness in the obvious sense, not excitement or constant joy, but a feeling that my life no longer required so much emotional effort to hold together. I wasn't patching cracks anymore. I was building on solid ground. I noticed it in how I handled new situations. When misunderstandings happened, I didn't rush to fix them immediately. I allowed space for clarity to emerge on its own. When someone pulled away, I didn't chase. I asked myself whether the connection had been mutual, and if it hadn't, I let it go without resentment. That felt like growth. There was a time when I would have taken distance personally, as proof that I wasn't enough. Now, I understood that distance often has nothing to do with worth. It's about capacity, timing, and alignment. That understanding softened my reactions in ways I didn't even have to think about anymore. I also became more honest about my expectations. I stopped pretending I was okay with things I wasn't. I stopped staying quiet to keep the peace. When something mattered, I said so, calmly, without accusation. And when it didn't, I let it pass. That balance felt powerful. I realized that the betrayal had given me a deeper respect for emotional boundaries, not just my own, but everyone else's. I no longer felt entitled to people's inner worlds, even when they were close to me. I let others share at their own pace, without pushing or probing. That respect changed the quality of my relationships. Conversations felt less transactional, less about exchange, more about presence. I wasn't gathering information anymore, I was connecting. And the people who valued that kind of connection stayed. Sometimes I wondered if she ever noticed the change in me, if she sensed the shift, the distance, the absence of access. But that question no longer carried curiosity or bitterness. It felt neutral, like wondering about an old road you no longer travel. I didn't need to revisit it. What mattered was that I felt aligned with myself in a way I hadn't before. I trusted my instincts. I honored my limits. I chose clarity even when it meant being misunderstood. And that choice paid off quietly. I slept better. I laughed more freely. I stopped bracing myself for disappointment. Life still surprised me, sometimes pleasantly, sometimes not, but it no longer shook my sense of self. I knew who I was. I knew what I valued. And I knew I could walk away from anything that required me to shrink. The betrayal had taken something from me, yes, an illusion, a version of closeness that wasn't as safe as it felt. But in exchange, it gave me something far more valuable, self-trust. And with that trust steady inside me, I continued forward, not hardened, not closed, but grounded and clear, allowing connection to grow where it was earned and letting go where it was not. I didn't rush anymore. I didn't cling. I simply lived, honestly, intentionally, and at peace with the person I had become. That peace didn't mean life stopped challenging me. It meant I stopped taking every challenge as a personal test. When something felt uncomfortable, I didn't immediately assume it was wrong. I asked whether it was asking me to grow or asking me to walk away. That question saved me from a lot of unnecessary suffering. I noticed how my body responded before my mind did. A tightening in my chest when a conversation crossed a line. A calm steadiness when someone respected a boundary without making it a negotiation. I learned to trust those signals instead of explaining them away. There were moments when people tried to pull me back into the role I used to play. The listener who absorbs everything, the friend who holds everyone else's weight without asking for anything in return. I felt the pull, familiar and tempting. But I didn't step into it automatically anymore. I paused. And in that pause, I chose differently. I began to understand that compassion doesn't require self-erasure. You can care without carrying. You can support without surrendering your balance. That distinction was subtle, but it changed everything about how I showed up for others and for myself. Sometimes, I thought about how easily I had once confused loyalty with silence. How I believed that protecting a relationship meant overlooking discomfort. Now, I knew better. Loyalty that asks you to ignore your instincts isn't loyalty. It's fear wearing a kind face. That realization was freeing. I also noticed how much more honest my joy became. When I laughed, it wasn't to smooth over tension. When I felt close to someone, it wasn't because I had shared something vulnerable too soon. It was because the connection felt mutual, unforced, steady. That kind of joy doesn't burn fast. It lasts. As new chapters unfolded, I carried these lessons quietly. I didn't announce my boundaries or explain my past. I didn't need to. The way I moved spoke for itself. The way I listened. The way I left when something felt misaligned. The way I stayed when something felt right. Every now and then, I would catch myself remembering the moment I first realized the betrayal, that sinking feeling, the disbelief, the quiet decision not to confront. I didn't relive it with pain anymore. I acknowledged it as a turning point. Not the moment I lost a friend. The moment I found myself. And from there, everything else began to make more sense. The choices, the pauses, the people who stayed, the ones who didn't. I stopped asking why some connections ended and started appreciating the ones that didn't require me to doubt myself. I kept moving forward, grounded in that understanding, allowing life to unfold without forcing it, trusting that what was meant to stay would meet me where I stood, not where I used to be. And I stayed open. Not wide open, not guarded. Open enough to feel, and grounded enough to choose. Some stories don't end with a confrontation or an apology. They end with understanding. This one did. I didn't need her to admit what she had done. I didn't need closure shaped by words or explanations. What I needed, I had already found: clarity about myself, about trust, and about the kind of connections I wanted to carry forward. The betrayal no longer felt personal. It felt instructive. It taught me that not everyone who feels close knows how to be careful. That access doesn't equal loyalty. That intimacy without responsibility can quietly turn into harm, even when there's no bad intention behind it. Most importantly, it taught me how to stop abandoning myself in the name of connection. I didn't walk away from that friendship angry. I walked away awake. Awake to my instincts. Awake to my boundaries. Awake to the quiet strength that comes from choosing alignment over attachment. I became someone who trusts slowly and fully. Someone who listens without collecting. Someone who holds other people's truths with the seriousness they deserve. And in doing so, I built a life that feels steady instead of fragile. The friend I trusted betrayed me, but she didn't take my ability to love, to connect, or to believe in people. She gave me something more lasting: discernment, self-respect, and a deep, unshakable trust in myself. And with that trust guiding me, I moved forward, not bitter, not guarded, just clear about who I allow close and why. That's where this story truly ends. Not with loss, but with peace.